Hi all, welcome to the Empowering Equine podcast, where we talk about all things related to science-based training and management, positive reinforcement, Lima focus training, and equine welfare and ethics. I'm your host, Alta van Niekerk. I'm joined by my husband as our moderator. Hope you enjoy this podcast and find inspiration to become the best horse person you can be for your horse. Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone has been doing super well. Today is just going to be me. The husband is not joining us today, but that is okay because we have a very hefty and a very lengthy topic. We're going to be talking about aggression in horses. So, one of the most challenging and dangerous behavioral problems found in horses are ones often linked to aggressive behaviors. It can range from threats to cause harm to actually causing harm to the trainer or handler. Ideally, we would not want to see these behaviors from our horses in any capacity. While it's normal for horses to have moments where they act aggressively, I've actually heard a dog trainer refer to it as the animal chooses to display aggressive displays in XYZ context, which I think is a very nice way of putting it rather than labeling our animals as, this horse is inherently aggressive. But it's also important to remember that by nature, horses are not an aggressive species and will choose many different avenues before resorting to aggressive behaviors. Horses spend much more time engaging in affiliative behaviors because it is important for their social structure. Affiliative behaviors are behaviors that promote harmony between individuals within the herd, while agnostic behaviors or aggressive behaviors are defensive or aggressive in nature, which serves to increase the distance between individuals. And these are in very specific contexts. When we think about feral herds and the life of a feral horse, acting aggressively towards each other is not worth it. It burns the little calories that the horses are able to consume on mid to poor quality forage they have access to. Fighting with other horses can result in injury, which is basically a death sentence because, there are no vets in the wild. Having a unsynchronized herd makes the herd more susceptible to predators and overall just causes a lot of stress for social animals like horses who rely on others for safety. It also carries a real risk of damaging these vital social bonds. So, why do horses act aggressively? I think it's important to keep in mind domestic horses display a dramatic number of aggressive behaviors compared to feral herds. 20% of all social interactions are aggressive or agnostic in nature in feral herds, where a large portion of instances were courtship related, so unsolicited courtship. It's much more complicated than just saying horses are aggressive or not. We're going to be looking at the aggression or agnostic behaviors in our domestic horses today, and we can just step into any boarding facility and see a lot of aggression among herd members and even towards people. According to the book Behave by Robert M. Sapolsky, I hope I said that correctly, considerable evidence implicates the amygdala in aggression. The horse has the biggest amygdala of all domestic animals. But if you asked amygdala experts what behavior their favorite brain structure brings to mind, aggression wouldn't be at the top of their list. It would be fear and anxiety. Crucially, the brain region most involved in feeling afraid and anxious is most involved in generating aggression. The amygdala/fear link is based on evidence similar to that supporting the amygdala/aggression link. In lab animals, this has involved lesioning the structure, detecting activity in its neurons with recording electrodes, electrically stimulating it, or manipulating genes in it, all suggest a key role for the amygdala in the perceiving fear-provoking stimulus and in experiencing expressing aggression. So horses will behave aggressively for a number of reasons, such as if they feel threatened or frightened. When they are in pain is a big one. When they are frustrated as a result of artificially created social groupings, i.e. in a boarding facility, as a result of inadequate early socialization, as a result of certain medical conditions or diseases, or to control access to resources, which may be restricted, such as food, breeding partners, water, space, etc. This is more commonly known as resource guarding. So chronic stress has also been shown to make horses more predisposed to act out more aggressively as a result of being more fearful in this state of stress and fear. So aggression can range in severity from something as subtle as pinning of the ears to a full-on strike with teeth out, teeth baring. Horses may behave aggressively towards people if they feel threatened or if they are trying to escape or avoid doing what the person wants them to do. They may also behave aggressively as a result of previous experiences. So let's look at some aggressive behaviors, aggressive gestures. How do horses act aggressively? I also think it's important when we talk about and ask the question of what is aggressive behaviors, we need to understand and learn the signs of what happens in the horse's expression before the horse starts displaying aggressive behaviors, because there's a communication ladder right there. Unfortunately, I can't show the graph on the podcast, but you can Google equine communication ladder. Equine Insight BT has a nice clear one you can look at. And for a more in-depth look at all the individual calming signals and displacement behaviors, I highly recommend the book Language, Signs and Calming Signals of Horses. I will link it down in the show notes below. So, calming signals are meant to achieve or maintain good social relationships. I like to think of it as a polite way the horse is expressing that they want to avoid conflict. All calming signals can be given as a single signal. After giving one or two, the horse usually becomes relaxed again if the calming signal is accepted in the sense of either the stimulus stops or the person stops aggressing or the other horse stops aggressing in a sense. Not necessarily aggressing, but stops their aversion towards the horse. So if that works, the horse just goes back into a state of, chill and calm and everything. But the more calming signals there are, the higher the tension the horse is expressing. When the stimulus continues, the horse will then move on to displacement behaviors. For the horse, displaying displacement behaviors are intended to let the horse release tension. While showing the displacement behavior, they disconnect from the situation and communication with the stimulus or with others. Displacement behaviors can result in two outcomes. Either the tension lessens and calming signals are given, after which the tension recedes further, or the tension increases. The horse gives more stress signals, possibly distance increasing signals, or weakened forms of these when there is increasing tension. Calming signals transition into displacement behaviors. However, if the increasing tension suddenly peaks, the horse skips displacement behaviors and goes straight into giving stress signals. So that's when the horse starts getting into flight, fight, or freeze. Stress signals are displayed by the horse when tension has risen to such a high level that a horse's body is kind of subconsciously preparing to take action, so to fight, flight, or freeze. Distance increasing signals are the signals the horse displays when the horse is trying to disturb or to put more distance between himself and the stimulus the horse is trying to avoid. It's important to keep in mind that these aren't full aggressions. It's an aggressive-like threat. After these threats fall onto deaf ears, so to speak, the horse will then be in full-on flight, freeze, or fight. Where instead, for example, bite threats, it becomes an actual intentional bite. So let's look at the communication ladder and see the behaviors that are displayed. So when a horse is not experiencing any stress, they will have nice almond eyes, a relaxed tail, elongated nostrils, relaxed lips, mid-low to low head neck position. So there comes along a stimulus and the horse starts displaying calming signals. Calming signals can be blinking, which sounds ridiculous because of course horses blink. It's all a part of the context. So the horse might look away, they will start half closing their eyes, they would start chewing, they can yawn, they can do a neck shake, they can seesaw, lowering, curving, or eating. When the stimulus still continues, the horse will then move on to displacement behaviors. So this can be self-biting, licking objects, pawing, quick rolling, head swings, sniffing or stirring up the ground without eating. And when the stimulus still continues, the next step is stress signals. So the horse starts displaying a high head neck position, triangulated eyes with the wrinkles, clenched lips, round nostrils, active ears on alert, carried or clenched tail, frequent defecation, pacing, rushing and snatching up food, and they will startle very easily. They will go into this state of being very reactive. And when the stimulus still continues, then the horse will move on to distance increasing signals, or they will shut down. But the distance increasing signals is moving away from the stimulus, biting, kicking, chasing away, bucking, rearing, a arched neck, or weaving, cribbing, nodding, half-closed eyes, and little facial expressions. These are more on the shut down side, which is also a form of coping and trying to alleviate what's going on. Now that we have a better idea of how aggression looks, let's look at the causes more in depth. Let's kick this discussion off with feeling defensive and threatened. A study conducted in Egypt by Ali et al. 2019 aimed to investigate whether mule aggression is an innate act towards people or is a reactive response to rough handling procedures by their handlers. A total of 374 mules from 50 different kilns were assessed and their handlers were interviewed. Handlers' data showed that 79% of participants believed that mules are inherently difficult to handle. 65% used nose ropes, metal chains for driving their mules, and 67% of respondents responded that mules must be beaten to work properly. Behavioral assessments revealed that 66% of mules were alert. Approach tests indicated that 30% of the mules exhibited signs of aggression, like bite threats, when approached by an unfamiliar handler, and only 16% showed signs towards their handler that were familiar. The assessment of body lesions showed that mistreatment-induced lesions, which were 42%, were more predominant than other categories of body lesions. Significant correlations were found between mules' aggression responses towards observers and the following parameters: body condition score, along with the handler's age, level of experience, and handlers' common belief about mule aggression and the nature of the work they were involved with at the kilns. Based on the results of this study, they concluded aggressive interactions exhibited by mules were most likely initiated by harsh and violent handling. I would like to read a quote from Hartman et al., and it reads, "A relationship based on trust, mutuality, and cooperation are what many horse owners are hoping for. Yet, during most work and handling from the ground, horses have negligible autonomy as humans assert control simply because of safety reasons. Attempts to dominate the horse to achieve control often encourages and justifies the application of harsh training methods and punishment. Consequently, the predominant reaction of most horses would be to avoid the trainer, show flight responses, or defensive behavior, which are all undesirable in a training situation and jeopardizes horse welfare and human safety." So, to conclude, rough handling and threats result in aggressive behaviors in our horses. That's it. Now, let's look at a very important cause that is often very much overlooked out of pure convenience. Let's have a look at pain. Experiencing acute pain can affect the social behavior of both humans and animals and can increase the risk that they exhibit aggressive or violent behaviors. However, studies have focused mainly on the impact of acute rather than chronic painful experiences. Horses are behaviorally very quote-unquote mute. Even when in great pain, perhaps because of non-disclosure of pain is a valuable survival strategy to avoid predation, because the weakest animal is often targeted by predators. Several back problems could be discovered after owners have observed increased aggressiveness when grooming or saddling, and when the horses were not just categorized as horses with a bad temper. On the other hand, and independently of the data for chronic painful experiences, behavioral problems with horses and especially aggression towards humans are regularly reported and constitute a common source of accidents involving veterinarians or caretakers. I hope I will be not completely butchering this name right here, so apologies in advance. Forix et al. 2010. Their study found evidence of such a link between chronic discomfort, potential pain, inferred from the presence of vertebral problems and aggression, which suggests that chronic painful experiences may act in ways like those of acute pain experiences. Chronic discomfort or pain may often be overlooked when facing quote-unquote bad-tempered individuals or horses, whether animals or humans. This experimental study confirms the importance of including chronic discomfort or pain as a major factor in interpersonal relations and models of aggression. So, unfortunately, when we scroll on social media platforms, we see plenty of horses biting while being girthed up, clenching teeth, biting while grooming, bucking on the saddle, rearing and resisting to move forward and kicking out. And usually the person posting the content would always disclose, oh, the horse is checked and cleared by a vet. And I mean, that is all good, but often we need to look further than just our local vet. We need to get in touch with a body worker, an equine dental expert, a hoof specialist, a nutritionist to look at our horse's dietary needs and consider common conditions in our horses like gastric ulcers. And we also need to remember that pain rewires our brains and the brains of our horses. We might have addressed the cause of the pain, but the horse is still anticipating the pain, so the horse would still act aggressively or defensively. This is where behavior modification comes into help change our horse's emotions by creating a good association with the certain situation. I use the humane hierarchy, and the first step is to always look at the physiological part of it first before continuing the behavior modification process. So our next cause is something often very overlooked or not seen as a priority in our modern equestrian world, and that is food-related aggression, so frustration and resource guarding. Hartman et al. Describes food-related aggression towards people in horses can occur mainly in stabled horses, but also in group-kept horses that receive restricted food. Hence, rather than labeling it as dominant behaviors based on resource guarding, an alternative explanation would be that the aggressive behavior was inadvertently reinforced by the human walking away after food provisions, or the horse learned unintentionally via operant conditioning the association between its behavior and the arrival of food. This is a phenomenon called aversion-induced aggression, where aggressive behavior is particularly likely to arise from aversive conditions that functions as motivating operations. That establishes the stimulation produced by aggressive acts as reinforcing. We describe the behavior that arises from the circumstances as aversion-induced aggression and argue that the motivating operations associated with the aversion-induced aggression are important factors in initiating and sustaining violent conflicts between groups. This is all linked down in the show notes below. So using physical punishment runs the risk of intensifying diagnostic behavior, and is correlated to an array of other associated problems. This is a problem I face myself as well. Resource guarding, although it's not human directed in my case, but rather horse to horse. My gelding Ali has a history of resource guarding, and he got better with my management setup, but when we moved Volare into our herd, who has always happily grazed with other horses in their feed pans, and Ali did not like this, and his history of resource guarding resurfaced, and this caused Volare to develop a quite bad resource guarding for himself. With management, it's getting better though, but this is something to keep in mind. Even in my setup, that I would say is quite good, okay, I guess I do my absolute best, it can still occur. We don't know what triggers our horses to act this way. So when we see it towards humans, I've seen this when people go into positive reinforcement training without the proper guidance or knowledge. Horses start to display bitey or aggressive behaviors, often because the horse is starting to become frustrated, and because our timing isn't good and our shaping plan isn't as well thought out as it should be. This can lead to horses feeling frustrated because the rules seem to not be the same, and the horse is being reinforced at the wrong time, and the whole process is just messy and rage-inducing for the horse. So that's why I highly recommend getting in touch with a professional in positive reinforcement training who ideally is registered with some organization or body, or even someone who works closely with other professionals and colleagues who are associated with organizations like the IAABC. Our next cause of aggression is inappropriate group housing and species inappropriate lifestyle. According to Pfleger and Krieger, I hope I said that correctly, 2013, their study observed social behavior and especially aggressiveness in 11 domesticated horse groups of different size and composition in basic social situations and when new group members were introduced. During basic social situations, the group and the type of paddock, grass/no grass, had no effect on any of the behaviors, whereas the enclosure size between 10,000 square meters had a significant effect on quote-unquote submissive behavior and an insignificant effect on aggressive behavior. During basic social situations, the aggression level approached zero when the space allowance was more than 331 square meters per horse. The researchers therefore recommend keeping horse groups in an enclosure with at least 331 meters square per horse to reduce aggression and injuries. Based on other research and my own horses, would also recommend ensuring that there is enough resources. So ad-lib food, shelter, water for all the horses to reduce resource guarding related aggression as well, while also properly introducing horses to each other in a low-stress way, so over the paddock fence for a few days until they are ready to meet in the same paddock to help reduce intergroup aggression with one another. I would like to talk a little bit about feral horses, because the ideology has been spread around for years that horses are an aggressive species based on observations on quote-unquote wild horse herds. Science has shown us that natural and feral horses mostly indicate a predominance of low frequencies and mild forms of aggression based on subtle communication signals and ritualized displays, and made possible by group stability. Studies have found no correlation between aggression, dominance, or leadership. The most aggressive horses are not necessarily the ones that have primary access to resources, and the ones that initiate movement in the group are not necessarily the most dominant ones. When we look at everything we have talked about, horses try to avoid acting out aggressively. Horses will opt for the most peaceful way out. So where does this misconception come from that horses are these terrible, aggro, out to get us animals. I would say it's largely because of the misinterpretation of equine body language. Most of our commonly understood and widely accepted interpretations of equine body language has been built upon the belief of dominance theory and the misinterpretation of language signs and calming signals. New research has found that modern horsemanship quote-unquote gurus did not have their facts as straight as what we once thought they did. A study conducted by Miller et al. 2016 found that the philosophy of a certain, let's call it horsemanship guru, is in, and I quote, overinterpretation of the horse's behavior in the round pen and a product of wishful thinking, which is not justified through behavioral research. Another study identified that, I quote, behavioral signs of equine distress are poorly recognized. They therefore warrant an increased prominence in order to reduce equine suffering. The use of anthropomorphic language may lead people astray, causing false beliefs that result in unrealistic aspirations and misinterpretation of equine body language. It may also give people reason to use aversive and harmful techniques such as positive punishment. For example, horses quote-unquote submitting to us as the leader is more likely a result of reinforcement/force rather than a result of humans attaining a high social status and a leadership role. I sound a bit like a broken record because we talked about this in episode 5 of the podcast as well, but it bears repeating. But more specifically, I think what continues the idea that horses are aggressive and promotes the use of aversive training practices is because of the idea of dominance theory. So what is dominance theory? I think it's important that we first establish what is dominance. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, dominance can be defined as supreme authority, governing, ruling. This is the thing. It's important to note that ethologists, people who study the natural behavior of animals, do not define dominance in this way. Ethologists rather define dominance as an individual's preferential access to resources over another. This is very important to consider. The definition and interpretation of what dominance is and how it has been very distorted in all circles of animals training, not just when it comes to horses and horse training. This idea of dominance hierarchies are often suggested, but according to a study conducted by Ellert and Crowell Davis, 1989, dominance and hierarchies amongst a herd of broodmares are situational and not fixed. Feral horses show little to no aggressive behaviors during grazing, while domestic horses show much more aggressive behaviors towards one another that often become misinterpreted as quote-unquote dominance. In fact, most of the social interactions within a feral herd are affiliative bonds based on kinship and friendship and not a fixed quote-unquote dominance hierarchy. Once again, signs of aggression are very rare and limited to very specific circumstances that is caused by either avoidance, rejection of inappropriate courtship, the horse's individual life stages, and the use of their teeth. The main goal of showing aggressive behavior, and often its only threat, is to establish or maintain individual space and not to establish social roles with one another. There is absolutely no evidence to suggest that horses have a concept of authority, respect, or obedience. According to ethological studies, horses don't have an innate sense of respect for us. Rather, they have a keen instinct for self-preservation. Some trainers aim to mimic the horse's behavior in order to gain a quote-unquote mutual respect or a quote-unquote alpha position in the dominance hierarchy to achieve compliance and to become the horse's leader. It has been emphasized that many of the interactions we make with horses do not align with the equid social ethogram. Nevertheless, the notion persists that horses' social roles can be transferred to human-horse interactions simply because horses are expected to respond to humans as they would to other horses. It is very unlikely that horse horse social status translates to human-horse interactions, and the concept of leadership, as advocated in many training ideologies, proves to be unreliable in the horse, as evidenced by several studies. Yes, horses may perform behaviors that we as humans deem as disrespectful or seem to be horses asserting their dominance, but these behaviors are not performed by the horse out of quote-unquote disrespect or defiance. The cause of these behaviors are often linked to fear, anxiety, pain, or the anticipation of pain. Something I always remind myself is that we cannot choose what our horses ought to feel, and what we believe to be quote-unquote unjustifiable behavior is very much justifiable to our horses. All behavior serves a function. I would like to quote Lucy Reese directly. The confusion between dominance, aggression, and authority has occasioned more ill treatment of horses to the point of sending them to slaughter, and more injury to people than any other single point in equestrianism. It is also important to note that Lucy Reese also encourages us to refrain from using the word dominance due to its widespread misinterpretation. The more appropriate term would be to say a horse's resource guarding. I also want to look at and digest a example of horses acting aggressively. I recently saw a video of a horse in its stall biting a passerby who was leading another horse. The horse was being led, then kicked out and kicked the handler. And it was a really messy situation, but I think it can be a good case study to look at and learn from. So let's look at some possible reasons why the horses acted this way. For the horse inside the stall that acted aggressively towards the horse and handler pair, one reason is because the other horse is passing in the barn aisle, are physically quite close. And here we can see the stalled horse would like to create distance between himself and the other horse, even the human, because he is trapped and can't get away from this perceived threat. So one of his options is being taken away from him. Another reason is that horses are often fed grain, so higher value feed in their stalls, and food is a valuable and defendable commodity, and the horse might not have access to ad-lib forage, so the stalled horse is resource guarding at the horse and feels at risk that he acts this aggressively, and the human just got in the way, unfortunately. For the horse that kicked out at the handler, once again, the handler was in the wrong place at the wrong time, unfortunately. The horse kicked out in defense at the horse in the stall, and the handler was just caught in the crossfire. Once again, an example of the horse wanting to create distance between him and the stalled horse because the space in the barn aisle is so limited. So analyzing this situation like this, we can see not one of the horses needed to be punished for behaving this way. Rather, we can make adjustments like the stalled horse needs to spend some more time outside and needs more space, and maybe the horse can go out in a paddock during the time horses and people are moving around in the barn. Just a few management things I can think of without mentioning training for needing to use any form of punishment or negative reinforcement, because that can sometimes make it worse before it gets better. So how can we address aggression in horses without making it worse? Often when more mainstream trainers try to fix aggressive behavior, it often involves a lot of punishment, and it will first become worse before it gets quote-unquote better. Why shouldn't we punish aggressive behaviors with punishment and with high-level negative reinforcement? Well, the long and the short of it is that it's unethical and ineffective, and sometimes downright counterproductive, because people are terrible at using punishment in a way that results in the least amount of fallout and with the desired response. Punishment is inherently coercive, and I would go as far as saying it's downright abusive, especially when it's used to deal with behaviors caused by pain, fear, or as a result of inappropriate living conditions. It's very unethical, and of course can lead to the behavior becoming worse and more severe, and will lead to the suppression of the behavior rather than addressing the root cause of it. And we also talked about all the fallout of punishment in an earlier episode. You can also listen to that. That is episode 2. So we need to learn to read our horse's signs of subtle stress before the situation escalates. I highly recommend the book Language, Signs and Calming Signals of Horses. For my fellow South Africans, you can find it on Kindle for a very good price, but I have found it on Take-A-Lot, but it isn't always in stock and it's very expensive. And while we're on the topic of good books, I also recommend Horses and Company by Lucy Rees, and is another very good resource every horse owner needs to have in their library. Lucy talks a lot about interherd aggression and gets into the complexities of it all. But to get back on topic, a study aimed to determine what type of impact the type of training method was related to the dog's behavior. A small portion of owners used only positive reinforcement in training. It turned out their dogs were the least likely to display problem behaviors. They were less likely to show attention seeking, fear and aggression. In addition, when owners used punishment, whether on its own or in tandem with other methods, their dogs were more likely to be rated as aggressive and more likely to show fear, such as avoidance of unfamiliar people or fear of loud noises. So the goal would be to use positive reinforcement to create a new association. So in training, the goal would be to use positive reinforcement to create a new association. We don't want to not only change the behavior of the horse, but we want to help create positive emotions through positive reinforcement and creating a good association with whatever the horse seems to be worried about. In most cases, I would use counter conditioning. Counter conditioning means to change how the horse feels about something they have learned to fear or dislike. I quote, "The use of counter conditioning is an extremely effective technique that involves gradually changing our horse's response to things it fears by associating positive emotions or actions with the fear stimulus. In a nutshell, you're changing your horse's mind on whether or not it should fear something by turning that thing it fears into something it will love. To do this, you will give the horse something it needs or desires during exposure to this fearful stimulus. The exposure should start off at an extremely low level and increase in intensity as the horse becomes more and more comfortable with the stimulus. The horse should always stay below its fear threshold during counter conditioning." This is a paragraph from Adele Shaw of The Willing Equine. The blog post is titled "Desensitization, the Method." It's also linked down in the show notes below because this wouldn't be a Powering Equine podcast if I did not quote Adele to some degree. So I would also like to add that counter conditioning is very powerful and works hand in hand with positive reinforcement, but it might not have the desired effect. My mare Libby finds grooming very aversive, for example, and due to her past experience, she has found using food while grooming or other husbandry behaviors to be a negative experience, specifically when food is involved. She does positive reinforcement training in a normal setting, no problem. She really enjoys it. But when I pair food with the medical procedure, not even the sweetest carrot on this earth is enough to bribe her into this situation. So it's important to go into the process with a good understanding of counter conditioning and our horse's thresholds. There is this common misconception that horses who are over threshold won't eat, which is true to some degree, but there are instances where eating is a response to stress. Drysma describes eating as a calming signal, dependent on the context, of course. Horses eat as a calming signal when the horse wants to remove tension and prevent escalation between itself and the concerning stimulus. The horse would kind of do a type of a body block during the process and try to create distance. But the higher the tension of the horse, the higher the bite frequency. So you will see horses would snatch at the food, either snatching the grass or hay or pellets from our hands. So it's not a calm munching, so to speak. And finally, when the tension continues, the horse would then stop eating. So that's kind of something I want us to keep in mind when we are working with our horses who have such strong feelings towards something that they would act aggressively. And I don't care what anyone has to say, our safety is the most important thing when it comes to interacting with horses. Work in protected contact, which is a barrier between you and the horse. Wear safety gear if you need to. Aim for calm and boring over fast progress. No horse is worth your health, your well-being, or your life. I myself have ended up in hospital and could have had serious brain injuries, and it's just grace that I haven't. So this is something I will preach forever and ever, because to be frank, I want to still train horses when I'm 80 years old. My bodily health and functioning is my number one priority. I don't want to be 50 and struggle to get out of bed in the morning or to enjoy the short life we have with the people we love. So be safe, guys, please. But so, when we break it down to the bare bones, aggression at the end of the day is about survival. Horses are prey animals and their primary response to fear is to get away. When that option is taken away from them, their fear will turn into aggression. The horse's natural responses are flight, freeze, then fight. In my experience, horses that opt for fight before flight or freeze is a horse that perceives that he has no other option than to fight, and in the past it has worked to some degree. So aggression as a behavioral response has become a conditioned response, or acting immediately with aggressive behavior has become conditioned because the horse's prior attempts has failed. I want to be very careful saying this because I've seen it taken the wrong way and promotes the idea that we can reinforce emotions, and that is not true to some degree. So it's very sad and something we ideally don't want to see. This is why choice is so important. Providing our horses as much choice as possible is so important in avoiding this kind of responses in our horses. Choice can and is a primary reinforcer, and choice can be as simple as allowing a horse to walk away and leave this situation. This is not only for our horse's welfare but for our safety. When our horses can say no in a way like just stepping away from whatever the situation is, it's much safer than them needing to bite or kick to get their point across. So preventing the aggression is better than reacting to aggression. This is a proactive process rather than a reactive process, just like most things in training in the world. I remember in my years studying behavioral sciences, everybody was like, how's the best way to address problem this, and it was always, the best is always to be proactive. Prevent this challenge rather than reacting towards this challenge. So that's all from me. That is what I had to say about aggression in our horses, and that's just it from me. I feel so lonely because I don't have my husband here to ramble on with me in these last closing thoughts. So all I'm going to say is, hug your horses and be kind to one another.